Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be with you again. This is Troy Jensen with a study on the Jesus I Never Knew, based on the book by Philip Yancey. Today we're going to cover the last chapter, which is The Difference He Makes. Next week we're going to start a new study on Romans, which is a great book. I think it's a foundational book that everyone needs to really dig into and spend time with. So please join us starting next week as we start to dig into Romans and what it means to us as Christians in this generation. So let's jump into the study this week on the difference he makes. So a few questions to kind of start thinking about as we've gone through this study over the last 13 weeks is, has Jesus truly made a difference in your life? What are you doing differently now? And if we saw the world the way that Jesus saw the world, and we respond in the same way that Jesus would respond to the world, what would you be doing differently? And after going through this study on Jesus, what can you say has changed in your life? And what things should change in your life because of what you've learned more about Jesus through this study? So think about those things as we wrap up this lesson this week. And if you need to go back and review the other lessons, they're all on our Facebook page, and you can watch them, sequentially from there, and refresh your mind on, what we've covered so far, talking about Jesus. So when you read the Gospels, what are some of the things that jump out at you about Jesus? Well, if you read the Gospels, all four of them together, you'll see these different types of things jumping out at you. You'll see that Jesus is continually frustrated, not only with the Jewish leaders and their beliefs and how strict they are with the rules and not understanding that he is the Messiah, but also with his disciples and how the lack of understanding they have, frustrates him at times. He's frequently sad, sometimes depressed on what's going on around him in the world. He's anxious, he's lonely, he's brutally honest, and at times tactless, right? Today, in our politically correct culture that we live in, Jesus would not fit in very well because he'll tell you exactly what needs to be said. He was difficult to predict or pin down, hard to understand at times, and he spent time with people who other people didn't want to spend time with. But a lot of these things kind of conflict with maybe some of the thoughts that we've had about Jesus in the past, of how we pictured him and how he, acted, while he was here. So I think it's good to refresh our minds on what actually Jesus did while he was on this earth by reading through the Gospels, to clear up that picture for us and set that tone for how he actually did live on this earth. So a few of the characteristics that kind of come out of the book that Yancey put together, we'll kind of hit on a few of those here. The first one was he was a sinless friend of sinners. He had an uncompromising graciousness towards sinners while having a hostility towards sin, right? And we probably have heard the saying, you hate the sin, but you love the sinner. The question is, do we live by that, or do we only give it lip service? And do we try to soften Jesus' strong words on morality and what it means to be pure and chaste, and kind of redefine sin and change the emphasis to fit our needs or our wants, or to fit our times? Is that appropriate? Is the church viewed as an enemy of the sinners? Or is it seen as a sanctuary for sinners where they can come and be loved and understand what true love is and what God wants them to do and how they can change their lives based on that? And how do you uphold the high standards of the moral purity that Christ calls for, while at the same time showing grace to those who fail the standard? How do we truly embrace the sinner without encouraging the sin? We need to really look closely at the way that Jesus lived his life on this earth and how he treated other people, how he showed love to them, how he forgave them, how he showed mercy. And then we'll start to understand a little bit better about how he was the sinless friend of sinners and how we can live a life like Jesus lived in that manner. He's also the God-man. God gave us himself in the form of a person, that person being Jesus, to either accept or reject him. God could have said, these are the options. You have to follow these rules A, B, C, and you can either accept them or reject them. Now, he did do that in his word, but he also sent Jesus to be that calling for people to either accept or reject God through Jesus. You know, Jesus pointed to himself and he said, I am the way. He also said, I and the Father are one. Another time he said, before Abraham was born, I am. And using the word there, the Hebrew word for God, which was just through the Pharisees and Sadducees and stuff into fits, you know, and they thought Jesus was blaspheming because he was saying that he was God, which he is. And they struggled with that. And at the Last Supper, you know, the apostles asked him, you know, show us the Father. And how did Jesus respond? He said, anyone who's seen me has seen the Father. So God gave Jesus to us in humanly form so that we could see who God truly was. And these claims really offended the Jews. And in many other religions, they would offend them as well through that arrogance, you know, of claiming that you are God, which Jesus did and which he is, but that would, you know, offend them. And they would think he was either a heretic or he was fully delusional, right? So you could either accept Jesus as being who he claims to be, the God, or you could say he's delusional and he has no clue what's going on. And that's what God gave us, the ability to either accept or reject that notion. And Jesus never swayed from his identity. He was the Son of God, sent to save the world, and God was reconciling the world through Christ coming to this world. And by doing that, he gave the binary choice. You can either accept or reject God and his love through Jesus, his Son. Jesus also offers us the portrait of God. And Paul, I think, rightly says Jesus is the image of the invisible God. And Jesus is where we can discern what God is like, and whom we can take or leave, we can love or ignore. But we learn that what God is truly like through Jesus. Martin Luther said, flee from the hidden God and run to Christ. And what he was really meaning was that you can see God more clearly by looking at Jesus, because Jesus coming in human form, giving us those examples of how to live, and those teachings truly reflected what God is like and what God should be seen like. And so if we run to Christ, look closely at him, then we will see that true God that we've been seeking. Jesus brings God near to us. And if you contrast that to the old law, which the old law was very strict about all the rules that you had to follow and how the sacrifices had to be made to make yourself clean and pure, and then you had to have a priest go into the holy place, and the high priest had to go into the most holy place to offer these sacrifices and stuff like that. Very strict adherence to the law was required to do that, and it had to go through the priest and the high priest to get there. But at Jesus' death, the curtain in the temple was torn from top to bottom, Mark says, and it tore that separation between God's presence and us, bringing us in relationship to him in his presence, and we don't have to fear, you know, anymore about being in his presence. And we know God as Abba, that loving, close, personal Father, because of what Jesus did and how Jesus showed us who God was and how we should love God, that close personal relationship as a father. Jesus is shown as the lover. God is the lover of people. Jesus reveals a God who comes in search of us, a God who makes room for our freedom of choice, even when it costs him his son's life, a God who's vulnerable. He reveals a God who is true love. This is where Christianity differs from most religions and beliefs in other gods, that a God could love us and desire to have a relationship with us, and as a result of that, he allowed his son to die for us to bring us into that relationship with him. Jesus tells us stories about God's love while he was teaching on earth. Luke 15, there's 3 different stories there that talks about it, where a woman searches all night for this precious lost coin, and when she finds it, she's so overjoyed. Then he teaches about the shepherd who loses one sheep and goes out and finds that sheep because of that love for that sheep. Then he talks about that son who was lost, the prodigal son, But then he came back home, and what did the Father do? The Father loved him and welcomed him home, brought him back. Jesus shows us what God's true love is like. And from Genesis 3 all the way to the end of the Bible, Revelations 22, the story is told of a God who has a desire to get his family back. And at what great lengths he will go through to make that happen. And through Jesus, Jesus is what embodies the promise of a God that will go to any length to win us back, even through the death of his Son. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Greater love has no one than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. For God so loved the world that he sent his one and only Son. God truly loves us, and he showed that by sending his Son. Jesus also offers us a portrait of humanity. We are made in God's image, we're told. And Jesus shows us what the image should look like, about how he lived his life, how God would want us to live in his image. And several verses talk about, though he was rich, yet for our sakes he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich. So we've been made rich because Jesus was willing to become poor for our sakes, who being in the very nature of God made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. And he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. So the way that Jesus came and humbled himself, become a servant, he showed us what being in the image of God should look like. We should be a servant to others. We should love other people. We should show mercy to other people. Hebrews hints at the incarnation being a learning experience for God as well, where it says, although he was a son, he learned obedience from what he suffered. He learned what it was like to be a human being when he came to this earth. He learned in 33 years on earth about poverty, family squabbles, social rejection, verbal abuse, betrayal, pain of being slapped and beaten, feeling a whip studded with metal lashed across your back, a crude metal stud driven through your muscles and tendons on your hands and your feet, and even experiencing death. He encountered evil personally in a new way. He learned sympathy for humans by being one. The Greek word for sympathy has two root words, syn and pathos, which means to feel or suffer with. And to really learn sympathy, he had to experience and feel and suffer the same things that humans suffer. And because of that, he can sympathize with us now. And he even hung on the cross. At that point, he could fully understand, and he did understand, what it truly means to say, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they are doing. Jesus was the wounded healer. Christianity makes the Scandalous Cross a symbol of our faith, where other religions don't really have many symbols that are as scandalous as the cross or the picture of death. They picture life, or a lot of them have no symbols at all, and things like that. But Christianity, they use the cross as a symbol, and you see it everywhere in the Christian faith. And I think it's important. Jesus commanded us to remember his death whenever we gather to worship. Right? He didn't want us to ever forget what happened at Calvary, because the cross is what bridges the gap between a perfect and holy God and a fatally flawed humanity such as us. But the cross gives us hope when there was no hope. God took the worst deed of history and he turned it into his greatest victory. And he got his family back. Isaiah says, through the servant's wounds we are healed, not by the miracles. And Yancey, towards the end of the book, kind of wraps it up and he says, the fatally wounded healer came back on Easter, which gives us a sneak peek preview of what is to come. and what history will look like from the vantage point of eternity, when every scar and every hurt and every sorrow and every disappointment will be seen in a different light. Our faith begins where it might have seemed to end. Between the cross and the empty tomb hovers the promise of history. Hope for the world, and hope for each one of us who lives in it. And the reason for that is all because Jesus came to this earth. He showed us what God is like. He taught us how to live with love and mercy in our hearts. And then he died for us so we could be reconciled fully back to God. So again, the question comes back to you after taking the time to study about more in depth about Jesus' character and how he lived on this earth. Knowing more about Jesus, what impact has that had on your life? How is it changing your life? And are you starting to live like Jesus lived? Are you showing love and mercy to everyone that you come in contact with, regardless if they have no respect for you or they have no desire to have anything to do with you, they hate you? Are you still showing love and mercy that God asked us to provide to other people? So what will you do with Jesus now? Are you going to accept him and live more for him each and every day? Or are you going to reject the notion that he was God incarnate, and that he came to show us how to live? Because I think if we don't live the way that Jesus called us to live and showed us to live, then I think we're rejecting him. So give that some thought this week. So again, thank you for joining us with this study. And like I said, next week we're going to start a study on Romans. So please join in with us on that. And go ahead and spend time reading through the book of Romans at least once, and then start preparing for each of those individual lessons that we plan to have. Thank you once again, and have a blessed day.